What is good, everybody? Juliana Page here. I'm going to dive right into this. I'm going to talk about relationships, specifically if you are single or if you are in between relationships, if you're wanting to be married, to have a relationship, to find your spouse, right? There's a lot of talk, particularly when you're in a pandemic, about online dating, and that can be extremely overwhelming. It can be incredibly frustrating. It can be disappointing, and it can be the best thing ever for some, right? It's everything in between. So this is really all about what to do before you even decide to embark in being online and going into that world, okay? Now, I'm taking this from perspective that's likely you've been in a relationship before, you've been hurt possibly. There's often more self-work that needs to happen. So I'm going to just give you really and honestly some checks and balances to really determine if stepping into online dating is your next step, right? Is it something because you want the status of relationship? Is it something that you're using as a distraction? Is it something that is kind of letting time pass, if you will, right? So just think about it. What is the motive behind wanting to be online? If you're already online, what is the motive behind you being online? So I'm going to give you, let me call them 3 pointers that you can use as a check and balance, okay? So I'm going to say heal, aka make sure that you're healed, not perfect, but healed. Make sure that you've made amends if that's possible. And then make sure that you have strong self-love practices in your life. And I'm going to highlight some because I know that there's many different thoughts on what that is and what it's not. So I'm going to highlight some of those. So for the first part, I'm going to talk about healing. Now, I know for myself personally, I couldn't recover from a devastating relationship apart from God. Absolutely could not do it. So I actually led a Christ-centered 12-step program. So God put me in leadership to probably ensure that I would go through all 12 steps. And then I continued to lead these programs and really walk with people through recovery. And a lot of people think that a 12-step is just for alcoholism, for example, or for drug addiction, but it's not at all. It's literally for any hurt, habit, or hang up that you had, which is everybody, right? And if you don't heal, what happens is you could even find the person that is a great match for you, but a lot of times we will sabotage that relationship and we can't fully embrace it or trust it, and old things will come back up. So it's really, really important to do. So I'm actually going to walk you through what the steps are just to give you a sense of, have you really healed though, right? Because when you heal, it's your mind, it's your will, it's your emotions, it's what's going on in your soul. What is in your heart still, right? Like, how is your attitude? What is your motive for being in a relationship? It has a lot to do with what's going on in your soul. So I'm going to help you understand what that even means. So first step, and what is so beautiful about this is God's word doesn't return void. So when you go on this process, the 12-step program is usually a year. So when you go on a year experience, it's like putting a do not disturb on your heart. And I highly recommend doing that, particularly if you've been in a dysfunctional relationship or if you've recently divorced. I recommend at least giving yourself a year. There's no time frame for this, but at least giving yourself a year to find who are you now without this person, right? And what did you lose sight of, or what went wrong? What role did you play, right? And really navigating that. So the first step is we admitted we were powerless over our addictions and compulsive behaviors, that our lives had become unmanageable. So let me break that down. That's, again, not just addiction, but it's any compulsive behavior that you have. So what is that for some? Constantly ruminating or replaying events that happened in that relationship. Thinking all of these victim thoughts and diminishing yourself. And it's thoughts of self-hate, and it could even be thoughts of anger and hatred towards another person, but it's constantly thinking about this or constantly living in the emotional devastation of it and not able to get through that and move forward. You're constantly going back and revisiting and replaying it. And that's a compulsive behavior. For some, it could be overeating or not eating, right? This includes eating disorders. For some, it could be, constantly watching TV and programs, right? And just zoning out. Whatever your numbing activity is, that's a compulsive behavior. It's anything that's really a behavior to just satisfy the flesh or satisfy you, right? Not your spirit, okay? So the verse for this one is Romans 7:18. I know that nothing good lives in me, that is in my sinful nature. Old man, unborn again, unsaved self, right? Versus new man, new nature, right? For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. Basically, we can't walk out a spirit-led life on our own. We can't do things like forgive and have unconditional love and be patient and merciful and all of the fruit of the Spirit apart from God. We can't. We might have the desire to do it, right? But our flesh is weak. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. So it's really, really important. What this is doing, I believe, is building this spiritual grit. This is maturity in God is what's happening as you go through this process. And I know for me, I didn't walk with God before this. So it was really helping me get word rooted in my system and making that alive and active for me. So number 2 is we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So that was probably my first step, if I'm honest, but I just knew that because of the situation I personally was in, I didn't want to attract anybody like that. And I was aware that I might be putting out energy, or there might be some unhealed places in me that allow me to be a target or even prey for certain types of people, right? That don't mean me well, right? And that's true. That's not just me. That could be true of anyone. But if you're not aware of that, if you don't have wisdom, if you don't have discernment, if you don't have boundaries, if you lower standards, right? Like really, if the enemy can find a way to get you off the path, he will do everything in his power. So it's really, really important to be spiritually strong and diligent. So for me personally, I knew that I couldn't move forward from that. I couldn't move on from that. I couldn't break free from that connection because soul ties are real, right? And they don't even have to be sexual. I mean, soul ties can really, really happen with anything that's going on in your soul, your mind, your will, your emotions, right? So, for it is God who works in you to will and to act according to his good purpose, Philippians 2:13. So with that, how do you really know what God's will for you is apart from walking with God? How do you know what real love is apart from knowing the author and creator of love? How do you know if your love isn't just conditional and actually manipulative and controlling apart from God? You don't. So we might mean well, we might have good intentions, but not all good things are God things. Let me put it that way. Number 3, we made a decision to turn our lives and our wills over to Christ's care and control. Therefore, I urge you, in view of God's mercy, to submit yourselves, right? So it's a conscious decision to turn your life over to Christ's care and control. What does that mean? That I'm not going to lean on my own understanding. I'm not going to use my own logic. I'm not going to fight my way. I'm not going to force my way. I'm not going to try to figure this out. I'm going to trust God to lead and guide me every step of the way. For me, it was even stepping into leadership and leading a 12-step study. I never saw myself in that situation. I didn't know, right? I probably could have come up with so many excuses, but I knew that that was the next step that God was leading me to, and I just obeyed. Okay. Next one, We made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Let us examine our ways and test them, and let us return to the Lord. Lamentation 3:40. So what this means is realize your part in wherever you are in your life. If you're not where you believe you could be, if you played a role in this situation, make a moral inventory of how you were showing up and what your thoughts were and what your behaviors were and what emotional home were you living in every day. What were you tolerating? What were you enabling? What were you creating? Right? What were you empowering? What were you allowing? What were you partnering with? So it really is a huge one, because a lot of times when we break up, we just focus on the other person and, well, they did this to me, or if they didn't do that, then, and we just stop even looking at ourselves. But part of healing is having a radical inward look at yourself. Number 5, we admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Therefore, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed. So it is really important not just to journal about this, but to actually have talk therapy, or particularly have people that can be walking with you through this, whether it's a mentor, whether it's a coach, whether it's a counselor, whether it's leadership in a recovery program, whatever it happens to be. It's really important to build accountability and to be able to voice that, because it also, when you're able to voice what happened and when you're able to talk that through with another human, there's a release that happens too, which is really powerful. And anything that's in the dark can still control you, right? So number 6, we were entirely ready to have God remove all of these defects of character. Humble yourselves before the Lord and he will lift you up. James 4:10. Really, really important. We can't fix ourselves, right? If we could, we would. Anyone who's had an addiction knows that apart from God, a lot of times you can't just think your way out of an addiction. You just can't quit by yourself, right? So we operate a lot of our lives under his grace, right? So God can remove that. God can transform a human, right? And it's walking with God and being transformed by the renewing of your mind, having a right spirit renewed in you, having a pure heart created in you. You can't do that on your own. So that one is really huge. Number 7, we humbly asked him to remove all of our shortcomings. So that is a beautiful divine exchange. So basically, anything that does not look like God in you, you can exchange that to God and he will give you his goodness. So anything ugly, shortcoming, any weakness, any of that, you can give it to God and he will give you a replacement. His goodness, his mercy, his love. And then now that you own it, you can give that, right? It's so, so powerful. So a lot of times what we're trained to do is hide. We're trained to pretend like we've got it together, like we've never been hurt. We put on this really strong and controlled facade, and then it's operating like a barrier to what it is that we actually want, which is real connection and love, right? Number 8, we made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. So this is number 2 of the steps that I was telling you. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, Luke 6:31. Now notice this is number 8. So this is well into the journey, at least 6 months into the journey of healing, where you've been doing your own work, where you've done honest reflection, where you've got accountability, when you've been really working through this with God. And it doesn't always happen, immediately. And sometimes this step takes a long time, which is really important to make sure that it is a step. And if you can't make amends to the person physically, whether that's because of, a dangerous situation, you can always write a letter, and that's still making amends. And you can read that in front of somebody as well and still process that and still release that. And you can still pray for that person. But it's a really, really important step so you don't continue to carry that. Number 9, we made direct amends to such people whenever possible. Key, except when to do so would injure them or others. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and then remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to your brother, then come and offer your gift. Matthew 5:23-24. So this is really important because when you're able to actually forgive someone or apologize to someone for the role you played in causing harm, causing pain, causing hurt of some kind, incredible healing can take place. But again, whenever possible. So when that's not possible to do in person, still writing a letter, still having that process is so, so important, because then you're not living with guilt, shame, condemnation. Just as Christ has forgiven you, you're able to forgive another, and you're able to forgive yourself, and you're able to move on without the weight and without the baggage that you could potentially harm or hurt another person with. All right, 10. We continue to take personal inventory, and when we are wrong, we promptly admit it. So if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. 1 Corinthians 10:12. So I've seen this happen before, where in recovery, sometimes you can think if you're, sober for a year, if you've been abstinent for a year, if you've overcome a food addiction and you no longer have eating disorders, for any period of time, really, you might think that you've overcome it, right? But this says too, like, be careful. So if you think you're standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. So essentially that's saying, be careful of getting caught up in your own pride, in your own ego, in your own strength, because it's by God's grace through faith that we do everything, right? So you've got to keep that mind that it's one day at a time, one moment at a time. That's how we walk life out. That's how we make life change. And it's how we live from the new man, from the healed man, from a whole self. Number 11, we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, praying only for the knowledge of his will for us and power to carry that out. So powerful. So I alluded to this before, and I believe it's John Bevere that wrote a book too, Good or God, basically highlighting that a lot of things that we think are good and we think that we should do and we think it's the right thing to do, God might not be on that. That might not actually be God's will, or because of the culture or the environment that we grew up in, the habits that we saw practice, what we were exposed to, we might think that some things are normal or this is the path for us, right? But apart from God, how do you really know his will for your life? My argument would be that you don't. Experientially, I didn't. Right? I mean, there's places that hard work and intuition can take you, but only God can sustain you. And hopefully it doesn't take a really painful event, heartbreak, injury, devastation, loss to have the awakening. But this is really important, to stay woke, so to speak, but constantly seeking God and living in God's presence, abiding in God, delighting in God, walking with God, having conversations with God, praying to God, receiving from God, and asking legitimately for what it is that you need. Just like you would cast your cares onto the Lord because he cares for you, just like you would ask for him to remove a shortcoming, you can ask for strength. You can ask for wisdom and abundance. Even if you don't have it, God will give it to you. So let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, Colossians 3:16. So the idea of this is that we are walking out our salvation every day, right? Yes, if you're born again, you have the new nature, Holy Spirit's living on the inside of you, but it's not like you're not going to be tempted again. It's not like you're not going to have old triggers come back and test you. So it's really important to be walking with God so that you can stay in victory, okay? And in peace. Huge. Number 12, having had a spiritual experience as the result of these steps, we try to carry this message to others and practice these principles in all our affairs. Brothers, if someone is caught in a sin, you who are spiritual should restore them gently, but watch yourself or you also may be tempted. Galatians 6:1. So the idea with that is that walking out your salvation is a lifestyle. And It's one that requires diligence. It's one that requires wearing the full armor of God. It's one that requires walking with God to really be able to discern God's will. Okay. And as you go through that process, it also is a humbling process. So you're not above anyone or beneath anyone, but you're able to be God's hands and feet in a totally different way. But it also is, be careful, because if you go back into old environments and you haven't healed, or you're doing it in your own strength, you could still be tempted and you could backslide. So it's really important to heal. And I share these with you to give you a sense of a healing process. So a lot of times when folks get out of a relationship, maybe there's a few months, let's say 3, where maybe there's no going out, maybe there's no rebound, maybe there's none of that stuff, but maybe there's also no healing that happens, because just time alone doesn't allow a healing process. This is applied healing. This isn't just like instant deliverance. God does work that way sometimes, but this is a process, because how do you have new character? How do you bear new fruit without a process? You don't. Right? How do you know what it is that you actually carry, or how far you've come? You know by what you're thinking, by what you're speaking, by what you're living in emotionally, by what you're storing up in your heart, by what you're declaring over your life, by your lifestyle, by your habits, right? By what you're putting in your eye gates and your ear gates, all of that. So healing sometimes requires purging yourself of a lot of things, repenting and literally turning away from other things, surrounding yourself with people that are a solid support system for you so that you have accountability in your life. So these are really, really important things. And hopefully this gives you a sense that healing doesn't have a timer on it, right? Healing doesn't have just this, God has set times, but healing, you can't use comparison here, right? You have a unique healing journey, and the key is to embrace it and to lean into every one of these steps and not even skip a single one, but to walk all of that out. And you can see that that does take some time. It's not an instant quick fix. And it's really important, because when you finally find your new rhythm, when you rediscover who you are in God, when you have peace with that, and when you're not craving or desperate or needing a relationship status to make you whole in any kind of way, then you'll attract something very different than you probably ever had. And that might feel like it's not your type, so to speak, but God knows you better than you do. And he knows how to lead you to, right, Ruth and Boaz. He knows how to match make. Let's just put it that way. So hopefully that gives you some context about healing. Like, have you legit healed and gone through a process? Do you still go back mentally? Do you still look up this person on Facebook? Have you made amends with this person? Have you looked seriously at yourself and recognized the role that you played, the things that you allowed, the things that you tolerated, the things that you created, right? Have you recognized that? Have you started developing new lifestyle habits? Have you changed, right? So really important to take a look of all that. You can see it's a lot of work. It's the inner work, and it's a lot that many don't dare to do, because it requires a heck of a lot of courage and bravery, for sure, and trust. Okay, so heal. Then make amends. You'll recognize that making amends was part of 12 steps, but make amends is really, really important, because it creates more freedom, and it brings closure. But you can still have closure even if it doesn't involve that other person. So keep that in mind, whether that's a letter, whether it's being able to process that and have some talk therapy around it, but you can still make amends, and you can still do it before God too. And then the last piece would be self-love. Now, again, this is not like a 3-step process, but these are just some boundaries and some pointers that you can use before you even get on online dating, because I'd be willing to guess that you don't want more of the same. Whatever hell you went through, I'm probably gonna bet, which doesn't sound really confident, but I'm gonna bet that you don't want to go through that again. All right, so self-love, let's talk about this. Number 1 would be pray and prayer, and develop some sort of spiritual practice. You've got to find what your home base is. You've got to find it. And you've got to have a way to be able to meditate, to be able to focus, to be able to guard your heart. You've got to discover what that means. All right. Number 2 would be journal, or work with a coach, work with a counselor, work with somebody who is definitely certified and trained to hold space, to draw questions out of you, to challenge maybe where you're tempted to go back or get stuck, right? It's really important because as you journal, as you have talk therapy, as you're working with these other resources, you can find your voice. Because a lot of times when particularly if we've been in unhealthy relationships, we've lost that. Number 3 would be eat healthy. This is so important. I remember there was a time where I did a no sugar diet. I think it was 6 weeks or so. Super powerful, but it's amazing how many things have sugar in them. What sugar can do to you hormonally, what caffeine can do as far as like spiking your energy and then dropping it and just shifting your moods, and then you're not able to sleep, and it can get really, really messy. So eating healthy, drinking a ton of water, eating foods that are as close as the source to possible, meaning fruits, veggies, anything that's on the perimeter of a grocery store, and really just eating for energy. Because either we don't eat or we eat a lot of crap when we're processing a lot of emotions. So keep that in mind. Number 4, boundaries. You've got to have boundaries. You've got to get to a place where you can let your yes be yes and your no be no, so you can have this confidence about who you are, what you stand for, and what you don't. You've got to guard your time. You've got to guard what you're consuming. You got to guard what you're creating. And the environments that you're putting yourself in, particularly ones that would make you vulnerable. It's really, really important to have boundaries. And a lot of times dysfunctional relationships can happen because of the lack of boundaries. You know, there's different things that you've heard: people pleasing, codependency, so many things. Okay. Number 5 would be sleep. This one is super important. A lot of times, particularly if you've gone through grief before, you might know this. You could just get hit with waves of being really tired. And it's really important to have some structure in your life and to be able to get some good night sleep, just to, again, avoid mental fogginess, avoid depression and discouragement and these big like dips, okay? Number 6 would be have a hobby, schedule date time with yourself, explore what your interests are. What do you actually love? What do you enjoy? Set aside time and resources just for you to have space to just go do something that you genuinely enjoy and care about. That could be a solo trip somewhere. That could be a spa treatment. That could be going and hiking somewhere. That could be a staycation. Who knows what it is? But set aside that time to take care of you. As they say, treat yourself, but do it intentionally in a way that's going to make you feel refreshed and stronger because of it, not like you need recovery after it, okay? And then the last one would be get back on track. So, for example, there's a ton of time that's often spent on the online dating. So before you invest all that time, be an independent entity that's able to survive and thrive on your own without needing somebody else. That's one of the biggest mistakes, that we need somebody else for provision, for resource, to make us comfortable, to make us whole. You've got to get to a place where you're whole all by yourself, where you can provide for yourself, where you can create for yourself, where you can live, right? Without needing anybody to come to your rescue. That is huge, huge, huge. So what do you need to do? Do you need more knowledge? Do you need more skill? What do you need to do, right? Do you need to clean up your resume? Whatever it is, make sure that you're getting back on track, okay? And then the last thing, should you decide that you've done all these things, you're in a really good place, you're ready to meet people, online dating is an option. It is. And especially the way the world is set up right now, with pandemic happening and people being at home and not out social, not just able to kind of randomly meet, right? it's an option. It's a viable option, but you've got to be smart about it, right? Because a lot of people aren't portraying their full self or their best self on online dating sites. They're only putting one photo. It might not even be a photo of them now. They're not really revealing a lot about themselves, their bio, what their intentions are, where they're at, what the state of their soul is. You've got to be strong before you go out among the wolves. Let's put it that way. Guy or girl, right? So there's that. And then if you're out there, here's some things that I would recommend when you think about before even meeting with somebody in person, so that you can really guard your time, right? Because time is something that we don't get back. So I would say there's 3 C's to think about when you're thinking about like, ooh, this could be really something fun for me, right? 1 would be connection. My argument would be is that you've got to have connection for it to go anywhere. Okay. Then I would say chemistry. There's got to be some sort of like attraction, and you'll usually know in your spirit, right? And then I would say the other part is compatibility. A lot of times though, I've seen this in working with many folks that we go off compatibility. Like, oh, this person's a good compliment to me, or they have similar interests, or they take care of themselves, or whatever it is. And we justify compatibility being a reason that we're supposed to be with somebody when there's actually no real connection or chemistry. And that will play out in usually unfavorable ways. So you've got to have connection and chemistry. And if you got those 2, compatibility will work itself out. So those would be my thoughts before you dive blindly into online dating. My encouragement would be never go in blind at all. I believe that when you're walking with God, yes, there's elements of the unknown that you just don't know, right? And there's things that are far too great for you to know. But when you're walking with God, He will not leave you. He will not leave you, but He will also not lead you down a path without Him, right? Or that wouldn't be unhealthy for you and really disruptive to your soul. So keep that in mind. Make sure that you're not just doing it out of insecurity, out of neediness, out of desperation, out of hunger, out of I just am lonely, I don't feel okay by myself. You got work to do. You've got work to do, and don't forsake the work. Don't forsake the work. It's a blessing. It's an incredible gift, and some people never experience that and never really come to know really who they are and are solid in that. And that is the best gift that you can give to yourself and anyone that you encounter, particularly if you're a parent. All right, so heal, make amends if possible. Get a solid self-love practice, because you're still going to need to practice that even with another person in your life. Just because they come into your life, all of a sudden, you've still got to have it. You've still got to be a single entity that is whole, even with another human. So do not forsake that. And then keep the 3 C's in mind before you actually start meeting with people in person, if you are meeting them online. All right. I hope this message was helpful. If you know somebody that could be blessed by it, make sure that you copy the link and share it with their friends.